Hi, Poppets. Today it comes to be that I'm feeling very bare. I have misplaced my hat. And I do, of course, have my workplace hat. But I don't know how well it would do. But for right now, I suppose I'll have it here, because I'm going to continue more stories. Today, we have Tom Thumb's Travels, which came immediately after the story of Tom Thumb. So, here we are with Grimm's Fairy Tales, Tom Thumb's Travels. There was once a tailor who had a son no higher than a thumb, so he was called Tom Thumb. Notwithstanding his small size, he had plenty of spirit, and one day he said to his father, "Father, go out into the world. I must, and I will." "Very well, my son," said the old man, taking a long darning needle. He put a knob of sealing wax on the end, saying, "Here is a sword to take with you on your journey." Now the little tailor wanted to have one more meal, and so he trotted into the kitchen to see what sort of farewell feast his mother had cooked for him. It was all ready, and the dish was standing on the hearth. He said, "Mother, what is the fare today?" "Well, you can see for yourself," said the mother. Then Tom Thumb ran to the hearth and peeped in the dish. But as he stretched his neck too far over it, the steam caught him and carried him up the chimney. For a time he floated about in steam in the air, but at last he sank down to the ground, and the little tailor found himself out in the wide world, and he wandered about, and finally engaged himself to a master tailor, but the food was not good enough for him. "Mistress," said Tom Thumb, "if you do not give me better victuals, I'll go out early in the morning and write a piece of chalk on the house door. Plenty of potatoes to eat, but little meat. So goodbye, Mr. Potato." "What are you after, grasshopper?" said the mistress, and growing angry, she seized a piece of rag to beat him off, but he crept underneath her thimble and peeped out at her and put his tongue out at her. Well, she took up the thimble and would have seized him, but he hopped out among the rags, and as the mistress turned to them, he ran between a crack in the table. "Hee, mistress," he cried, sticking out his head when she was just going to grasp him. He jumped into the table drawer, but in the end she caught him and drove him out of the house. "Well, he's complaining. Come on. To be fair, he seems to be a young sort of fellow. So, never meaning to be set upon the world with a puff of steam, Well, let's continue. So he wandered on until he came to a great wood. There he met a gang of robbers that were going to rob the king's treasury. And when they saw the little tailor, they thought to themselves, such a little fellow might easily creep through a keyhole and serve instead of a picklock. "Hola," cried one, "you giant Goliath, will you come with us to the treasure chamber? You can slip in and then throw us out the money." Tom Thumb considered a little, but at last he consented, and over he went with them to the treasure chamber. Then he looked over the door and above and below, but there was no crack to be seen. At last he found one broad enough to let him pass, and he was getting through when one of the sentinels that stood before the door saw him and said to the other, "See what an ugly spider is crawling there? I'll put an end to him." "Let the poor creature alone," said the other. "It's done you no harm." So Tom Thumb got safely through the crack into the treasure chamber, and he opened the window beneath which the thieves were standing, and he threw them all out, $1 after another. Just as he had well settled into the work, he heard the king coming to take a look at his treasure, and so Tom Thumb had to creep away. The king presently remarked that many good dollars were wanting, but could not imagine how they could have been stolen. The locks and bolts, they were in good order, and everything seemed to be secure. He went away saying to the two sentinels, "Keep good guard, there's someone after our money." When Tom Thumb had set to work anew, they heard a chink, chink, chink of the money, and hastily rushed to catch the thief. But, hiding in a corner, he covered himself up with $1 so that nothing of him was to be seen. And then he mocked the sentinels, crying, "Here I am!" And they ran about when they came near him, and he was soon in another corner under a different $1, crying, "Here I am!" Then the sentinels ran towards him, and in a moment he was in a third corner, crying, "Here I am!" And in this way he made fools of them and dodged them about so long in the treasure chamber that they got tired and went away. Then he set to work and threw more dollars out of the window, one after another, till they were all gone. And when at last he came to the last $1, he flung it with all of his might, and he jumped nimbly onto it, and flew with it out of the window. The robbers gave him great praise, saying, "You're the most valiant hero. Will you be our captain?" And Tom Thumb thanked them, and said he would like to see the world first. But then they divided the spoils, and the little tailor's share was only 1 farthing, for that was all he was able to carry. Then, binding his sword to his side, he bid the robbers good day, and started on his way. He applied to several master tailors, but they would not have anything to do with him, and at last he hired himself as an indoor servant at the inn. The maid-servants took a great dislike to him, for he used to see everything that they did without being seen by them. And they said, "Well, wait a moment, and we'll pay you out." And so they took counsel together to play him a mischievous trick. Once Tom Thumb was going about watching the maids as they were mowing grass in the garden, and she saw Tom Thumb jumping about and creeping amongst the cabbages, and she mowed him with the grass, tied all together in a bundle, and threw it to the cows. And among the cows was a big black one who swallowed him down without doing any harm. He did not like his lodging, but it was so dark, and there was no candle to be had. When this cow was being milked, he cried out, "Strip, strap, stroll, will the pail soon be full?" But he was not understood because of the noise of the milk, and presently the landlord came into the stable and said, "Tomorrow this cow is to be slaughtered." At that Tom Thumb felt very terrified, and with his shrillest voice cried, "Let me out first, I'm still here inside." The master heard him quite plainly, but couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. "Where are you?" he asked. "Inside the black one," answered Tom Thumb, but the master, not understanding the meaning of it all, went away. The next morning the cow was slaughtered. Happily, in all the cutting and slashing, Tom escaped all harm and slipped among the sausage meat. But when the butcher came near to set to work, he cried with all his might, "Don't cut so deep, don't cut so deep, I am underneath." But for the sound of the butcher's knife, his voice was not heard. And now poor Tom Thumb was in great straits, and he had to jump nimbly out of the way of the knife, and finally he came through with his whole skin. But he could not quite get away, and had to be let himself remain with lumps of fat to be put into black pudding. His quarters were rather narrow, and he had to be hung up in the chimney in order to smoke, and then remained there for a long while. At last, when the winter came, he was taken down for the black pudding and was set before a guest. And when the landlady cut the black pudding into slices, he had to take great care not to lift up his head too much, or it might be shaved off at the neck. At last he saw his opportunity, took courage, and jumped out. But as things had gone badly with him in that house, Tom Thumb did not mean to stay there, but betook himself again to his wanderings. His freedom, however, did not last long. In the open fields there came a fox, who snapped him up without blinking. "Oh, Mr. Fox," cried Tom Thumb, "here I am sticking in your throat. Let me out again." "Very well," answered the fox. "It's true that you're no better than nothing. Promise me hens in your father's yard, and I'll let you go." "With all my heart," answered Tom Thumb. "You shall have them all, I promise you." Well, then the fox let him go, and he ran home. And when his father saw his dear little son again, he gave the fox willingly all the hens that he had. "And look, besides, what a fine piece of money you've got," said Tom Thumb, and handed over the farthing which he had earned in his wanderings. "But how, you ask, could they let the fox devour all the poor chicks?" Why, you silly child, you know what your father would rather have you than 10 hens in all of his yard. So, I guess that's very sweet that even though Tom Thumb wound up helping out the robbers, he managed to make his way home eventually to his loving family once again. And so, I think it all turned out. And yeah, it's a bit heartwarming, I think.